Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich, and today will be part two of my story. And so last time I had just kind of left it off with I had cold called into this financial planning firm and they had hired me. So to transition back to the phase of life, I'm in college. It's a time where I'm really wanting to grow and start gaining professional opportunities. Now, simultaneously, I was playing basketball, and that was my number one passion at that point in time. And my freshman year, I made the varsity team and I was getting some playing time, but not a lot. And then sophomore year came around, I was getting about the same amount of playing time. So I had this weird dynamic where, basketball had always been my life. It was what I had put all of my time and effort into, and it just wasn't paying off for personal success like it had in the past. And this was a really humbling moment for me. I had always thought, man, my college career would be very illustrious. I would have a lot of personal accolades, a lot of team success, and the personal side just didn't come. And as I reflect back on my college experience, I would uh, love to say it went differently than it did. However, it was exactly what I needed. I was probably a pretty confident, arrogant person, and going through the college experience that I had basketball wise, I learned a ton about myself, and I learned a ton about how to handle adversity and to be a teammate above, what's most important for Phil and what he wants from a success standpoint. So that was really good for me. And as I transitioned and as I was looking for an outlet for my competitive juices, I had this internship in the financial planning world. And every year, this company had an event, and the event was the meeting where everyone got together. And I went to it after my sophomore year in college, and I remember the managing partner of Nebraska at that time. His name was Mike. He and I are sitting at this internship event, and he says to me, or the top 10 interns go across the stage, and he looks at me and he goes, "Hey," and he doesn't say my name, but he says, "Hey, that could be you someday." And I'll never forget hearing that, thinking, man, I wonder if this guy actually thinks it, but if he does, I could be a top 10 intern. And so that was my goal at that point. So for my junior year in college, my goal was to be a top 10 intern. And I started doing all of the different things people talk about and how it can lead to your success. I started getting up earlier. I started being intentional with my calendar and my time. I started a sheet that would check marks every single time I hit the goal or I hit a mark that I was trying to hit. So that way I could, make sure I was keeping score. So that was a really important time for me as I was transitioning. I was sitting there thinking to myself, okay, this is a really good opportunity. Let's keep going with it. And so after my junior year, I was a top 10 intern in the country, and it was amazing. I was elated, and I started to realize, okay, I think this whole business thing can be your new outlet for competitive juices. And basketball, even though it's not going the way you want it, you can still put a lot of time and effort and energy into it. But it may just be a time to start pivoting and making business number one, basketball number two. And that's what I did. And then after I was a top 10 intern my first year as a junior, they said, I don't know if you can do it again. Most people one hit wonders, don't do it twice. So that really had my competitive juices going. So as a senior, my goal then was, all right, I need to do better than I did last year so I can be a top 10 intern again. And once again, what I started to learn there was time maximization. And one of the most important principles that I still utilize today is doing the right things at the right time. And what I mean by that is people oftentimes don't think about when they should do certain activities. They think, oh, well, if I do it now versus at 4 o'clock, what does it matter? And what I found to be true is that it matters a whole bunch. When we do the activity is as important or more important than anything else. And so what I started to think about was, okay, when can I do what? So a common thing for a college kid was, hey, I don't have class from 2 to 3. Maybe I'll get my homework done. So that way at night I can go out with my friends. The way I thought about life was, well, from 2 to 3, I could have a client meeting. I could make a phone call to set up a client meeting. But at 8 o'clock at night, I couldn't do that. So I should do my homework at 8 o'clock at night and allow myself to make phone calls or have meetings from 2 to 3 o'clock. So there's a great example of this as a visual. And this gentleman has a cylinder, and he has a group of rocks, a group of pebbles, a group of sand, and then a group of water. And he says, do you think I can fit this all in there? And some people say yes, some people say no. And he starts with the sand, and he dumps all the sand in. Then he dumps all the pebbles in. And then he dumps the rocks in. And then as he's dumping the water, it starts to overflow. And he goes, whoever said I can't do that, you were right. And he goes, but let me try it again. Do you think that I can do it? And this time, even less people say they think he can do it because they just saw the failed experiment. But this time he doesn't start with the sand. This time he starts with the big rocks. So he gets all of his big rocks into the jar. Then he pours the pebbles and he kind of shakes it so the pebbles can fill into the cracks. Then he pours in the sand and those funnel through more of the cracks. And then lastly, he puts the water. And when he does that, everything fits in. And so that's been a great reminder and life example for me is when we do certain activities matters. Something I talk to a lot of people about today is when do we work out? Many people want to work out, but they don't make the time. They don't have the time. So we need to start, doing certain activities at certain times. So that way we can accomplish everything we want in a day. So as I'm progressing on, junior year, top 10 intern, senior year, top 10 intern, I was really thinking, man, this is where I want to go. And simultaneously, I'd finished my undergrad, I'd finished my master's, and my parents, I remember sitting down with them, and I think they thought, hey, this has been a fun, sales role. Surely now that Phil has his master's, he'll go do something else. And they just asked, are you sure you want to do this? I just remember telling them, I said, I've never woken up one day and said, crap, I've got to go to work. And my dad just said, hey, that's probably a pretty good job. You should keep doing that as long as you feel that way. And so that was the catalyst. I knew, well, hey, once I graduated, that's what I was going to be doing. And I really pursued that at the highest level as I could. Now, while I was in college, I think we all have that moment in time where we just need some grounding of life. And so one day I had to drive 40 minutes to the office in Lincoln and 40 minutes home. And one day I thought, man, I don't know a whole lot about my grandparents. I should just call my grandpa and check in, see how he's doing, and maybe ask a little bit about it so I can learn. So I call him one day and it's probably a 10-minute conversation. It was nothing long. It was nothing crazy, but about a 10-minute conversation. And my mom called her parents at that time every Sunday. So she called me after that Sunday and said, man, Grandpa really appreciated you giving him a call. And I was like, man, I called the guy for 10 minutes. It wasn't a big deal. But what it stood out to me was, all right, that means a lot to him. And maybe it could be a cool opportunity for me. So my goal then was every Friday, I'm going to call my grandpa. And so every Friday after intern training, when I was driving from Lincoln back to Seward for school, I would just call him. And it was super fun for me to get to hear his stories. I think he enjoyed it as well. And I still do it to this day. Every Friday, give him a call and just chat. And one time I remember he just asked, hey, how's it going? And I told him, I go, Grandpa, it's going fast, man. And, you're whatever, 20, 21 years old, life does seem like it's going fast. And he just said a very profound statement to me. And I don't know why it clicked. But he just said, Phil, let me tell you, it only goes faster. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, man, what are you talking about? You're 70 years old. You're sitting on a couch watching TV every day. Your life surely can't be going fast. I mean, that's about as relaxed of a state as you can be in. And what I found is every year I say the same thing. I'm like, man, this has been the fastest year of my life. And so just an encouragement, whether it's somebody in your life, could be a grandparent, a parent, friend, be intentional about reaching out to them, because it may just be a great opportunity, but two, there's some wise nuggets in there from everyone. We just have to be open to learning and embracing that. So as I progress on and, I finish up college basketball, I finish up my internship, and I'm deciding to go full time in our financial planning and starting my practice. Great experience, great opportunity. And one day, I'm 22, so I'm just finishing up college and sitting down with these potential clients. And we're sitting at their house having this conversation. And I just asked them, hey, what are some of your goals? And one of their goals was they wanted to sell their existing home because they were in the process of building their next home. And they just said, Phil, we're going to sell our home because we need those dollars in the equity of the home to go purchase our next one. So at this moment in time, I had just made a comment. I said, well, what does that look like for you? And they said, well, we'll probably rent an apartment and rent a storage unit. So that way we don't have to worry about the two mortgages. And I just said at that moment, I go, I hate moving. And they go, you know what? So do we. And I just kind of looked around the house and I said, well, it's a pretty nice house. I said, if you got rid of your realtor and you knock down the asking price about $10,000, I would be happy to buy this house from you. And they looked at me and they kind of laughed and they said, okay. So we leave the meeting and go from there. Well, the next morning I get a phone call from this gentleman and he goes, so Phil, my wife and I we're a little confused. Did you buy our house last night or were you joking? And I said, no, I mean, as long as you would, fire your realtor so I don't have to pay those fees and you'd reduce the price $10,000, I would be happy to buy this from you. And so that was my beginning in the real estate world. So I wish I could say I had read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or I was listening to podcasts like Bigger Pockets podcast and getting a lot of retail advice for that. My family had been in real estate. But at the end of the day, that was just not the case. To me, it seemed like a wise financial decision. I thought, hey, maybe I could even possibly live there someday. It's a nice home. But for me, I just said, yep, let's do this thing. And so that was my beginning in real estate. And there's been a lot of lessons learned as I've continued to grow that, buying more and more properties. But that was my first one. And I remember being, 22 and thinking, holy cow, this thing costs, I think it was like $145,000. I was like, that's a lot of money. And it seemed that way at the time. It's definitely been a fruitful investment and something that has more than covered its expense. But I just remember taking that leap at that time was a bit nerve-wracking, being young, but luckily I had been smart with the dollars I was earning as an intern. I had started to put money away for myself. And so when that day came, I was financially prepped. And I know in part one, I talked a little bit about learning the value of the dollar from my parents. And obviously some of those principles were very impactful on me having those funds. But also what I was learning in the financial planning world, hey, be smart with your money, be diligent with it. And if you are, you can have an opportunity. So entered into real estate. So I'm growing my financial planning practice. I'm starting this real estate company. And then this one summer day, I get a phone call from a Michigan number. And the Michigan number, I didn't recognize it, but I answered the call. And the gentleman on the other line goes, hey, is this Phil? I said, yeah, it is. And he goes, hey, Phil, this is Coach Limback, I'm the new head basketball coach at Concordia University. I said, oh, that's awesome. Congratulations. Been hearing, and I remember watching you as a kid. You're going to have a great time here. And he goes, well, uh, yeah, that sounds good. Thank you for the encouragement. And I said, yeah, you don't need to call me. I think you might have an old roster. Like, I've already graduated. And he chuckles and he goes, well, no, I was actually calling to see if you'd want to coach. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't have any passion for basketball at that point. I had played my 4 years. It hadn't gone like I wanted. I had learned a lot of amazing lessons, but it just wasn't the thing that I was ready to do. So I said, well, hey, I appreciate the phone call. Once again, what an amazing compliment. But, honestly, I've got a full-time job. I'm not looking for one. And he goes, that's okay. He goes, but you're single, right? I said, yeah, I am. He goes, you don't have any kiddos? I said, no, I don't. And he goes, well, if you're ever going to coach, now is the time. And I thought to myself, and I said, I would love to have the impact on others that some of my coaches had on me. And so I said yes. So at that point, I was working full time in financial planning. I was starting this real estate business. And then I decided to pick up this pretty much voluntary coaching opportunity that was like a full time job, just really not getting paid to do it. And so I was set. I was busy. But once again, coming into what we talked about earlier, my time management had to get better. So, the firm that I was working with said, hey, you can coach college basketball, but if your numbers are not good, like, we're going to have to pull the plug on that, or you're going to have to say no to this opportunity and just try and get into coaching. I said, deal. And so the journey began. I ended up coaching for 5 years at the college level. And what I will tell you is the thing that I probably learned the most while coaching was how to coach people. And so what I mean by that is everyone receives feedback differently. And what I would try and do before our basketball games would start while we were in the practice phase was I'd sit down one-on-one with each guy and I'd just say, hey, how do you like to get feedback? How do you like to be coached? And the reason I'd ask that is because so many times people would get yelled at on the court and you would just watch them crumble. You would say, gosh, he's not going to be worth much anymore the rest of this game. Well, on the other hand, you'd watch guys get yelled at and they'd go out there, they would step up their level and they'd be good to go. So I wanted to know that because sometimes it was worth pulling a guy out of the game for 30 seconds, talking to him on the bench, and then putting him back in, opposed to yelling at him while he was on the court. And I think that's so true in regards to everyone was hearing the same message. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, well, we coddled certain people and we're tough on others. No, everyone got the same message. It was just in what way was it delivered? And I think that's super important, whether you're looking at how do you parent your kiddos? How do you coach your team? How are you running your business or your organization? At the end of the day, everyone on the bus probably has a certain way that they would like to receive feedback, the way they would like to be coached and developed. And so that was something I really learned how to do and how to do well. And the second thing that was important was I had a lot of different experiences as a coach, right? I had been the star player on a basketball team. I had been the role player on a basketball team, and I had been, we'll just call it a supporter on the bench on a basketball team. And I think what was so important about that was, you're meeting these 18 to 23-year-old men and you're getting to have an impact on the way that they're going to treat the rest of their life. And so, there were the guys that were the star players. Hey, how do I help get them to be as good as possible? And all the while, at the same token, how do I make sure to keep them humble and a part of the team? On the flip side, there were role players. How do I make sure they're ready? So when they get the opportunity, they're ready to step to the level. They're not going to say, oh man, I'm not ready for this, or man, today my game was just off. Because as a role player, you really only get the one chance. And if you come in and you don't produce, there's somebody else that'll get those minutes next time. So we want to make sure, how do we stay ready so we don't have to get ready? And then if you're on the bench, how do you have a positive attitude? How do you make sure that your teammates know that you care about them above yourself? And how do you make sure that you know that the team is more important than you? And once again, that was a transcending moment for me to realize that the team was bigger than me. I always thought I was a significant part of the team, but really you're one of 12. And the weighting is probably lower on you than it was on others. And that helped me as I got into my professional world. How do I coach and develop advisors? How do I make sure my friends can have success and I can be happy for them instead of being a little bitter or resentful when they have success? I'm like, dang, how are they already where they're at? So that was a really important season of life for me, was coaching, taking what I had learned as a player, what I was learning professionally, and then how to coach and develop men. And I remember I had recruited a kid from a different state and he had left. And he called me one day. He had been with us for about 2 years. And he called me one day and he just said, hey, I needed to talk to someone. My girlfriend and I broke up. And we talked for a solid 40 minutes. And I'll never forget remembering that's why I coach. Basketball was the reason we came together, but the real reason I was coaching was giving a young man an opportunity to grow into a mature man, a mature adult. And so we had a tough conversation about, hey, where are you at with things? How are you mentally feeling? No, yeah, this one didn't work out, but I promise there's going to be another opportunity. And so I think, once again, might be a call out to you. Hey, how do I put others above myself? How do I make sure the team feels more important than any one individual? Or it could just be on the relational side. What are you doing to show up, to show your circle, the people you care about most, how you can be an outlet for them and give wise and sound feedback. So as we transition from that, running my financial planning practice, we had a first year goal, and they talk about your first 6 months and your second 6 months, and only about 3% of people hit the first 6 months, and only 1% or 1.5% people hit the second 6 month goal in the entire nation. And so that was my next goal. This was a phase of life where goal setting became very important to me. I started to write visions. So I think what happens a lot is people will write their vision, and it's really just a bullet point list of things they'd like to do. And the beauty of that is you at least have something to see where you're going. For me, that wasn't enough. What I wanted to do was really put myself in the mindset of where I was going. So I wrote out this pretty elaborate vision. And what I did was I fast forwarded my life 3 years, 5 years down the road. And I said, all right, maybe this was in 2013. It's 2016. I'm looking back on the last 3 years. Here are all the amazing things that I wanted to accomplish. So that was my focal point. How do I make sure that I'm doing all of the things daily to get to where I want to be 3 years down the road? So when you think about that for your life, what's your vision? What's your goal? Where are you going? A lot of people talk about this, but just that idea of everyone's going to end up somewhere. It's just, what intentionality do you have on where you're drifting, right? So if I'm a boat on water and I just let the waves take me, I'm going to end up somewhere. It just may not be where I intended to go. However, if I'm steering my boat, right, if I start getting off course a little bit, it's easy to paddle and course correct, get myself back on track. And so as we look at that, that's been a really important piece of my life, is having a vision for where I see myself going. Now, you don't always end up there, or sometimes what you thought was a goal and a vision ends up not being all that important to you. And you're like, you know what, at the end of the day, that really wasn't where I wanted to be going. And that's okay. You can always course correct. But at least if you had something that you're focused on and a direction that you're trying to go after, you can see how close you can get. So I like to keep score. Famous coaches have said winners keep score. And I always viewed my vision for my future self as the way that I keep score. How close am I getting to where I want to go? And knowing, hey, it's a process. It wasn't a one day and I had 3 years worth of accolades accomplished. I knew it was 3 years down the road, but that helped me prioritize and say, all right, what am I doing today that is going to help me in the future? So I would just encourage everyone listening, go ahead, write a vision. Where do you want to be in 3, 5, 10 years? And put yourself in that mindset and say, all right, I'm here. I'm looking back on the last 3 years. Here's all the things that I've been able to accomplish. And I would tell you, don't just make it business. Don't just make it financial. Make it personal. Relationships are one of the most important things to me. And the people in my life know that. I call frequently, or I try to. I'm probably not as good as I should be, but I try and call my friends frequently, stay up to speed, hear about where their life's at, because relationships are so important to me. And if they're important to you, just make a habited way to reach out to people and to connect with them. Now, an interesting conversation that was had for me on the dating side. So, uh, I would get questions frequently, still get questions frequently. Phil, why have you not dated? And at that phase in life, Mike, who was running our state, we were out at a golfing opportunity, and I think I was 21, 22, and he just says, Phil, you know, um, are you dating anyone? I said, no, no girlfriend, had one, but just didn't work out. So I'm single. And he goes, I'll be honest with you. I don't think that's a bad thing. He goes, if I were you, I would stay single until you're 27 years old. And I couldn't tell you anything else about that day. I couldn't tell you anything about where we went golfing, how we shot, anything. I just remember that phrase coming from him. And I just said, well, why 27? And he goes, Phil, who you are in your young 20s most likely is not who you're going to be in the future. And he goes, what I mean by that is, doesn't mean you're not going to be doing the same job, doesn't mean you're not going to have the same faith life or the same this or that, but you're not firmly rooted in your beliefs yet, for most people, right? Some people are, but most people aren't. So he goes, if I were you, I would wait until you're 27-ish, right? Until you would start really pursuing a relationship. And what I will tell you is, I heard that, I believed it, and I didn't question it. That was really my focal point for my younger years. And why that was so important was I had a lot of developing to do personally. Who I was at 22 was not who I was at 27. And I believe that to be true for forever, right? Who I was at 27 is not who I am today at 32 years old. But a lot of the core beliefs and core principles that I have today, I did have when I was 27. And so, although we're always progressing and maturing, there's certain formidable years that are really good. And there's a book out there for anyone that's young, and even if you're in your 30s, you could read it. But it's called "The Defining Decade" by Meg Jay, and it talks about your 20s and how what we do in our 20s is really going to be the catalyst or the launching pad for the rest of our lives. And for anyone listening that says, "Gosh, I pissed away my 20s. I didn't do anything productive in my 20s," don't worry, there's plenty of time. However, for those of you where maybe you're in your 20s or you did use it, what we know is that it really does set the launching pad and the trajectory for where our life can go if we're strategic in that. And one of the most strategic things that happened in my 20s was the connections that I was able to cultivate, the relationships that came from different events or different people that I was surrounded with. So make sure you're surrounding yourself with great people that are lifting you up, that encourage you to think differently. And two of those amazing relationships that I had was my friend Jason and my friend Nate. And what I'll tell you is, to this day, those are two of the most successful guys that I've spent time with. And what would happen is every Thursday we would get together and we would have beers and wings. And it was one, just awesome to be around good guys. Like, I always love spending time with them. But the second thing that happened that was super important is we would talk about like where we wanted to go, what we thought was possible. And I'll tell you, every time I'm around these two guys, my mindset is just like, dang, I'm not thinking big enough. And that was a huge catalyst for me. And now to see where they're both running, very successful businesses. And it's just so cool to see them, and I'm super excited for them both, right? Everything they're accomplishing. And I think the only reason I can be excited for them is what I learned playing college basketball about. It's not a competition all the time. Sometimes it's understanding that's bigger. It's more important to be about the team, and just getting to be with these two gentlemen and still calling them, great friends. I I can be happy for their success. It's not just my success, right? It's not a comparison game. They can have success in life and I can have success in life. It doesn't need to be viewed as me versus them. And I think that happens for a lot of people as they're unfulfilled with where they're at. So then they get some bitterness and some jealousy about where their friends are at, and that can tarnish a relationship. Or you can view them as, oh my gosh, what a great example of what's possible. I need to start spending more time with them. So this was all, kind of a, really about a 7-year window of time where, my business was growing. I had some great career success. I was getting the opportunity to coach basketball, developing as a leader. And then also, I was, growing a real estate business and really starting to learn, what does that look like? Why do people want to do this? And those were all really 3 core pieces of my life. And so we'll pause for today, but I hope some of the takeaways you have is, how can we make people more important than us? How do we make others more important above self? 2, what we do matters, but when we do it might matter more. And so how do we prioritize things? How do we make sure we're being efficient with our time and when we do things? And then lastly, support of others, right? When we surround ourselves with great people, great things happen. And so my belief is, hey, if I can be a big supporter of the people in my life, I will inherently get the opportunity to surround myself with great people. So have an amazing day. Send me a message. Let me know if there's anything that stuck out to you. And then we'll look forward to part 3. Hey, how the heck did we get to where we're at today? Next time. Have a wonderful day.